Thank you very much. So let us welcome all our guests today. We have slightly more than 20 right now. Hopefully a few more will join. So I see several of our students and a few from outside our university as well. I see my former colleagues from CSTEP. Welcome to them. We shall start our webinar on resource efficiency and circular economy, new policy directions for India. At the outset, I'll introduce the speakers. Let me just begin by just introducing myself. Most of you already know me. For those who don't, I am Abhijit Banerjee. I am a associate professor of environmental studies at the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities at JG. My background is in environmental policy, and I have worked on resource efficiency and circular economy for the last several years. Before joining GJU, I was working with GIZ, the German International Development Agency, and my former colleague Reva is a speaker today. And during our work at GIZ, we also worked very intimately with Terry. And Shobik was leading that project. So I have known him for a long time as well. So it's good to have two guest speakers whom I have known for a long time. But I also would like to announce, unfortunately, that our third speaker, as you saw from the announcement of the event, Pavitra Mohan Raj, she had a last-minute illness. So we are very sorry to hear that. And she had to cancel. She tried her best, but she had to cancel. She even thought she would be able to participate partially this morning, but then she's had to cancel. So we are all very sorry about that. But what we decided to do is that both our other guest speakers, Reva and Shobik, they have been experienced in working on this topic for a long time. So between us, we would be able to cover at least some aspects of the topic that Pavitra Mohanraj was going to cover, the private sector perspective. So that's our only option left today. So what we'll do is we will, our existing speakers will try to cover the private sector perspective, which was originally going to be covered by Pavitra Mohanraj. Okay, so with that introduction, let's first introduce our speakers and then we can start immediately. First, starting with Dr. Reva Prakash. Dr. Reva Prakash is project coordinator with GIZ, the German International Development Cooperation Agency, for the European Union funded Resource Efficiency Initiative, EU REI. She works on issues related to fostering resource efficiency and secondary resource utilization through a life cycle approach, especially in the areas of building and construction and electronic waste. She has worked on the implementation of the resource efficiency strategy of the Niti Aayog and the EU delegation to India, including support in the preparation of the resource efficiency sectoral strategies, especially on the electronic waste sector and the construction and demolition waste sector. Earlier, she was responsible for operationalizing the Secretariat of the Indian Resource Panel. We'll learn more about the Indian Resource Panel from her today. She has a PhD in international politics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU. Okay. Welcome, Reva. Now I'm going to briefly introduce you to our next speaker, Shobik Bhattacharya. Shobik is a senior fellow and associate director at Integrated Policy Analysis Division of TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute based in New Delhi, which is one of the premier think tanks in India. Shobik holds a master's degree in economics with specialization in world economy also from Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, New Delhi. He has more than 16 years of experience in the field of energy and environmental research as well as management consulting. Currently, he's also pursuing a doctoral program from the Indian Institute of Management, Lucknow. So within a few months, we will have Dr. Shobik actually. So congratulations for that in advance. Shobik has undertaken and led various consultancy and research assignments for different ministries, bilateral and multilateral organizations, as well as multinational corporations, both during his time at TERI and before. His areas of work include resource efficiency and circular economy, developing policies and strategies for product and service value chains, industrial ecology, material demand and supply assessments, material flow analysis, life cycle analysis, impact assessments of industrial and infrastructure projects, as well as assessment of impacts of trade on environment and resources. He has also undertaken detailed valuation assessments of health and economic impacts of pollution, transportation, power sector, the brick sector, etc. He had led many capacity building activities for corporates, academia, and civil society organizations. He is also a frequent contributor to national dailies and media organizations on topics of environment and energy related topics. Souvik was awarded a young Global Economic Fellowship in 2011 by the Kiel Institute of Global Economy in Germany. He was selected as fellow and contributing lead author by UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, for Global Environment Outlook 4, GEO4, which is a prestigious publication by the UNEP for every few years, as well as the Global Environment Outlook 6 report prepared for the Asia Pacific region. He is also a member of the Bureau of Indian Standards Committee on Environmental Management. So welcome, Souvik. Okay. So we have introduced our guest speakers. So our next step is I'll start off with a basic introduction to the concept of resource efficiency and circular economy. We have a lot of students, both from my classes as well as other students from our university as well as from other universities. So just a basic introduction to the topic and why it is important. Then we'll have our speakers talk about the specific context in India, what is driving the policy change in India at this moment in the last few years. Okay, so I'll share my screen. Just a minute. Okay, can you see my screen? Shubham? Yes, okay, good. So let me start. We are interested in overall resource sustainability. If you look at resource consumption trends globally, we see that there seems to be a linear correlation between increase in resource consumption per capita shown in the horizontal axis and GDP per capita income on the vertical axis. So it seems to be a linear correlation. That brings us to a question that should we always expect, we have a majority of developing countries proceeding along this path. Does that mean that all developing countries would need to continue along this path of ever increasing resource consumption to attain a level of decent level of income, which is obviously a very difficult question in a resource constrained world. So we do get some answers. If you look closely at this graphic, this is from the circular economy textbook. We see, if we look at some of the countries to the extreme right of the figure, this is probably North American countries like the US, versus if you look at some of these countries here, if you can see the mouse I'm pointing with, these are probably some countries in Europe or Japan. So we do see that two groups of countries with equally high levels of income have very significant difference in resource consumption per capita. So at least this gives us hope that we do not necessarily need to have very high level of resource consumption to achieve a decent level of income and quality of life. So with this learning, we should plan for our developing countries that we need not adopt necessarily the American model of ever increasing resource consumption to attain better income and sustainable development. Of course, resource consumption, resource extraction, use and consumption, the whole life cycle has so many environmental impacts. Particularly if you look at the mining industry, extraction, the mining industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world. And it has both in terms of water pollution, air pollution, and ecological devastation. It is by far perhaps the single largest industry with the highest impacts. So I have reproduced one picture here just to demonstrate what mining industry typically looks like. It typically happens far away from us, so it's out of sight. We don't really realize what is going on, but this is the kind of legacy that is left behind by minerals and mining extraction. huge areas left to complete and sometimes irreversible devastation because of our need for resources. Since we are extremely concerned about climate change, it is important to reflect on the fact that extraction and refining of production of materials is responsible for about half of global emissions. So there is no way we can achieve our climate targets like for the Paris Agreement 2-degree targets unless we really think about resource sustainability. So this is another very important dimension. One very interesting aspect that we typically, unless we are students of this topic, we typically don't think about is the fact that our resource footprint has been increasing over time in somewhat surprising ways. Not only are we consuming more resources, that is something we already understand, but look closely at this figure. This is taken from the UN International Resource Panel. Look at the blue graphs represent the actual directly the materials in international trade. And the yellow graphs represent what is the upstream materials left behind. So we see that, yes, the materials in international trade are increasing, but what is increasing even faster is the upstream materials left behind. Total amount of materials extracted, total material associated with upstream uses. Because we extract a lot of material, only a small part of that is useful, which is then refined and either we use it domestically for industry or we export it. So why is this increasing? Why is our overall material extraction increasing? We see that one of the reasons is that as we use up the best quality resources, we are left behind with only poorer and poorer quality resources. This particular example for copper ore shows that over time, over the last 100 years, the copper ore quality, how it has decreased from 100 years ago, 2.5% copper ore was seen as a good thing, was seen as a high quality ore. Now 0.5% is seen as a high quality ore. So you can see the stark difference. We are using up the best quality, we are left with worse and worse quality, which automatically means that we have to dig up more stuff just to get the same amount of copper. Now, correlate this with our previous slide. This is one of the important reasons why the total upstream material extracted is increasing. For the same amount of material that is used in our economy, the amount of stuff that we have to mine is actually increasing, and which obviously means consequences for the ecology, and both in terms of the energy we use for mining, as well as the ecological impacts in places where the stuff is mined. Also, as we start running out of our existing reserves, or at least the good quality reserves, the accessible reserves, the good quality reserves, there is a scramble to find new stuff. First of all, we are finding lower quality stuff, and then we are trying to find stuff in places which formerly we felt were impossible, were out of reach, in remote and vulnerable areas. We are starting to look for seabed mining. We're starting to look for mining in the Arctic. Now, these are extremely ecologically fragile regions, and they are not even well studied. So it is the consequences of large-scale mining and extraction in these regions are unknown, or virtually unknown. So the bottom line is that unless we reduce our thirst for materials, we will continue this pattern. We will destroy one place and we will move on to the next place. We'll mine stuff, more stuff, destroy this place. We'll just keep moving on to the next place. And we keep moving on to the more ecologically fragile and remote places in our continuous ever-increasing thirst for resources. The other development that we have seen recently is what is known as resource nationalism. Certain types of resources are very concentrated in certain countries. As the world becomes more politically polarized, we have differences, even enmity between different countries for a variety of reasons. We see increasing concerns about potential conflict, maybe only trade-related conflict, maybe perhaps even something more, breaking out over access to resources. We all know about the conflict over oil. So this has been going on since the 1970s. But increasingly, we are increasingly worried about conflict over other types of resources as well. One recent incident is what I have highlighted here on this slide is the so-called rare earth category of minerals. China dominates the production of this category of minerals. And due to the conflict between China and the US, there is this long-standing tension that what if China cuts off the supply to the rare earths? What could happen? The entire electronics industries, renewable energy industries, automotive industries, aviation industries, everyone is dependent on rare earths. So we see this kind of potential conflicts are also something of concern going forward. Now, so we have just in a nutshell tried to understand the different implications of our ever-increasing thirst for resources. Now, shifting gears, let's look at how it would benefit our resource sustainability, how it would benefit us going forward. We all know about the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. SDG 12 is explicitly related to resource sustainability. This is something we all know. But in addition to that, we can think of so many other SDGs which are indirectly related to resource sustainability. Most obviously, energy and climate, because we just learned that almost half of global emissions comes from the resource supply chain. Then we can think of industry, economy, clean water, pollution, biodiversity preservation, all these sustainable cities, all these SDGs. So you can easily say half of the SDGs are related directly or indirectly to resource sustainability. So we see how important that is going forward. Now concentrating on India, let's look at the situation India is in. If you look at the graph here, again taken from an International Resource Panel study, we see in terms of total extraction, India is second in the world. After China, China is by far the first. India is second in the world in terms of total extraction of minerals. And perhaps quite alarmingly, India has the highest extraction density in the world. What does it mean? Tons of material extraction per square kilometer, which means India is a densely populated country. So if the extraction density is high, which means it has potential for more conflict. India is also highly import dependent on key minerals. If you just quickly glance at some of these key minerals, cobalt, nickel, and so on, oil, we all know that India is dependent on oil imports, but look at the other minerals, copper, cobalt, nickel, these are vital for our industrial sector and infrastructure. And we are almost exclusively dependent on imports on these minerals. So obviously India, it's a very urgent problem for India to focus on resource sustainability, resource efficiency, and so on. The other concern in India is that if we look at where our mineral reserves are, we see a strong correlation with forest areas. And the forest, which has two implications. One is that to expand resource extraction, we have to sacrifice our biodiversity. So are we, are we okay with that trade-off? Secondly, the forest regions in India are also home to indigenous people, our tribal communities. So we have seen so many conflicts in recent years in India where mining expansion has led to conflicts with tribal communities. So India is blessed with many mineral reserves, but are we okay with the trade-offs? Are we okay with sacrificing biodiversity? Are we okay with sacrificing the rights of tribal communities? So we see India is not in a very easy position with related to resource extraction. So that again reinforces the need for more emphasis on resource efficiency, circular economy. Now, as the last slide, I quickly want to define, especially for introductory students, what we mean by resource efficiency and circular economy before we head to our guest speakers. Resource efficiency is the narrow definition of resource efficiency is expressed as a fraction, as I have noted here, economic output per unit of resource consumed. So it's expressed as dollars of GDP per ton of materials consumed. So this is the narrow definition of resource efficiency. You can see if the the value is increasing, we can say the resource efficiency of the economy has increased. But we have to be a little careful about how we interpret the definition of resource efficiency. Suppose if we look at resource efficiency in the US, I don't have that graph. I used it in my course. We will see that the resource efficiency in the US is much higher than that of the resource efficiency in India. If we just look at the figures, what does it really mean? It seems counterintuitive. In US, we all know per capita resource consumption is very high. They're very wasteful. But why is their resource efficiency higher than in India? The answer is that because it is expressed as a fraction. If the numerator of the fraction, the GDP, increases very high, then the value of the fraction changes. So for example, if your tertiary sector, advanced economies have booming tertiary sectors like finance sector, like Wall Street. If you have a boom on Wall Street, your GDP increases so much, the tertiary sector doesn't consume so much resources. So your numerator is going to increase a lot, your denominator is not going to increase so much. So if you look at that explanation, so your resource sustainability of a country may not have increased, but the narrow definition of resource efficiency may have increased. So when we think of resource efficiency, we have to think of it in a little more holistic perspective, not just the narrow definition as defined by this fraction. We all know what the circular economy means, that instead of a linear economy where we extract minerals, we manufacture something, we use it and throw it away. Instead, we have a more of a circular economy where we keep reusing our resources as much as possible, so that we take fewer and fewer resources from nature and we generate fewer and fewer wastes. So the concept is very simple. The overall goal, but one point I should make here is that circular economy, to the layperson, the circular economy may mean only recycling. But circular economy is not only recycling. Yes, recycling is an important part of it, but circular economy is not only recycling. The overall goal is to reduce material throughput, what I have highlighted in red. What is material throughput? The material throughput is the total amount of materials that are flowing through the economy, from extraction, manufacturing, use, and disposal. So we have to reduce that throughput. That is our ultimate goal for resource sustainability. So the broader view of resource efficiency and circular economy is to reduce material throughput. We can do it for a variety of means. We all know about the slogan, reduce, reuse, and recycle, right? And there is a reason why reduce and reuse are first, recycle comes last. So there's stronger emphasis on reduce and reuse. So there can be many approaches. We can redesign products so that we can reuse products, like simple examples like using grocery bags. We can reuse our grocery bags. We can reduce the need for resources by, for example, adopting different business models. For example, we have cab sharing now. Instead of owning a car, we can have cab sharing. That dramatically reduces the need for resources. So there can be many, many approaches and many different new types of business models, but the overall goal is to reduce material throughput. So this is something I wanted to make it clear in the beginning. The last point I want to make is that what about India? When we think of India, the immediate reaction we may have in our mind is that India is a poor country. So don't we already recycle a lot of resources? We don't let anything go to waste because somebody is salvaging something, because everything has value. So compared to rich countries where people throw stuff away, in poor countries, somebody is always salvaging something. If you throw it away, somebody will pick it up and reuse it. So doesn't that mean that we are reusing a lot of stuff? Doesn't that mean we are already very resource efficient? The answer is yes and no. So this is something we have to understand clearly. The yes part of the answer is exactly just as we described. Yes, someone is already picking up, somebody is always picking up something if you throw it away, because there are a lot of poor people who make their livelihoods from the salvage economy. But on the other hand, the salvage economy is typically dominated by the informal sector in India. And the problem with the informal sector is that in addition to terrible working conditions and terrible health and safety violations, they have limited access to technology and finances. So they can only extract a very limited amount of materials from what can theoretically be salvaged. So yes, they pick up a lot of stuff, but that doesn't mean that they extract a lot of valuable secondary materials from what they pick up. So this is a limitation of the informal economy. In poor countries, the salvage economy is dominated by the informal sector. So which has these limitations. First, health and safety, terrible environmental conditions and health and safety of the workers. Secondly, they are limited in what they can salvage. Okay, with this introduction, I'll hand it over. I'll stop sharing the screen and I'll hand it over to our first guest speaker, Dr. Eva Prakash. As we heard, she's from the German Development Agency, project coordinator of the EU Resource Efficiency Initiative. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you for inviting me for the webinar on resource efficiency and circular economy. If I could request you to please share my PPT.
Yes.
Yeah, so as Dr. Banerjee has already introduced me, I am Reva. I'm project coordinator with the EU Resource Efficiency Initiative. The EU Resource Efficiency Initiative is a EU-funded initiative with the consortium, which is being led by GIZ and also consists of our partners TERI, CII, and Adelphi. We also have Shavik today from TERI, and we are all part of the same project and have been working on resource efficiency and circular economy for last few years. Yeah, that's my introduction. As already,
can you see the screen? Have I been able to share the screen?
Okay. Yes, we are on the first slide.
Yes.
If I could go to the third.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we have already talked about the resource consumption and what the resource consumption, resource extraction, and how resource intensive Indian economy is. And from 1970 to 2010, we know that Indian economy has jumped 420% in terms of resource use and extraction, and that's a big jump. And in 2020, it has already been shared. In 2020, Indian economy had become the second biggest extractive economy in the world, second most resource intensive economy. And yeah, I mean, our per capita consumption has also been increasing, but our gross consumption has definitely been increasing at a very rapid rate. And therefore, looking at a growth or looking at an approach of a resource efficient or a circular economic approach for India makes sense due to various reasons, and I will come to it next. Yeah, so why do we need a resource efficient and circular economy perspective? I mean, Dr. Banerjee has already talked about where our resources lie, how much, I mean, do we need to go into these already extremely biodiverse areas? These are mostly with a lot of where our old growth forests stand, where our tribal communities live, and which are actually the last remaining sources of, let's say, lung for us in India. And therefore, we need to obviously protect our natural resources. However, we also need to provide for a lot of, for our people. We also need to continue to grow to meet the needs of our population, and that's why having a more responsible approach to resource extraction, resource use, resource consumption is very important, and therefore we need to develop in a sustainable manner. It obviously supports, let's say, also our international commitments on various issues, including on climate change, our nationally determined contribution. Resource efficiency and circular economy can make a big contribution there. And we also, obviously, we have talked about SDGs, or sustainable consumption and production agenda is SDG 12, and that's also the larger rubric under which resource efficiency and circular economy measures fall. So also in meeting our SDGs and given the interlinkages of SDG 12 with all the other SDGs is also is therefore, I mean, is also very important. And also in the G20 agenda, resource efficiency has been picking up more traction over the last few years. There's a resource efficiency dialogue which has been constituted, which is sort of a platform where all the leading economies that have initiatives on resource efficiency and circular economy come and talk and exchange their learnings, exchange their knowledge, present best practices, and also sort of think about what are the various issues that are of interest and of value across different economies and across different countries. So resource efficiency from that perspective for India also makes sense. India is going to be hosting G20 in 2023, and there it will also be hosting the G20 dialogue, and it will also obviously need to demonstrate and also show to the rest of the world what it has done so far. And I'm also going to go into detail on what that movement has been in India. And I mean, in terms of achieving resource security also domestically, given how resource dependent, how import dependent we are for certain critical materials. So to also ensure that, and to also shield the Indian economy from price hikes and also market fluctuations, and obviously the upcoming resource nationalism, wherein the economy could also be at a disadvantage. So it makes sense to also then achieve resource efficiency and circular economy and mine resources from end-of-life products. And in terms of how COVID has also impacted the economy, how it has impacted our manufacturing sector, and I mean, and the entire value chain, it also makes sense to also start thinking about, from a circular perspective, of how we can also make the consumption loop smaller, and make those loops in such a way, make our manufacturing value chains in such a way, adapt in such a way that we have the resources that we need available to us. Also, I mean, geographically also at shorter distances, and I mean, given that you might already understand that consuming local resources and consuming closer resources from where you live, closer to where you live, is obviously makes sense also from a climate perspective. So I will go into talking about what is that approach that we are looking at when we are talking about resource efficiency and circular economy development in India. So I will just briefly touch upon the life cycle thinking approach, and Dr. Banerjee has already talked about decoupling, first of all, and also what resource efficiency means. I mean, resource efficiency very simply means doing more with less. But how do you do more with less? How do you achieve that? You achieve that through thinking through from a life cycle perspective, where you understand what kind of measures are needed at mining stage, at manufacturing stage. What do you need to do as a consumer when you're consuming something? What are the measures needed there, and what happens to the products or at the end of life stages, where how we can recover. And also a very important stage throughout all of this is, how do you design the products? How do you design systems? How do you design processes that make it possible to consume resources more sustainably? And another thing that I've also wanted to talk about is, with resource efficiency and circular economy, is the question of the rebound effect. How do you, I mean, you could consume resources more and more efficiently, but you could continue to use more and more resources. So you could derive more out of less, but you could still be consuming more and more. So like Dr. Banerjee also talked about the 3 R's, about reduce, reuse, recycle. I would like to expand the 3 R's into also thinking about what are the different kind of measures that are needed during the entire life cycle I mean, for example, you don't just need, when you're thinking about reducing, how do you reduce? How do you refuse what you don't need? Obviously, when you want to reuse, what kind of products, how do you design products that are amenable to reuse? How can you repair them? How can you remanufacture? Can you repurpose them? And then coming in the end to recycle. I mean, it's the very end of the life cycle thinking, where you then think of how do you recycle products, how do you recover the value out of those products, and then linking it to the circular economy thinking is how to keep the value of products at a at a at a particular level. I mean, when you're consuming a resource, the value of resource down that entire life cycle begins to degrade more and more. But what is it that you can do to keep the value high, and to keep the value at an optimum level, so that you don't need to then, going back to, let's say, mining or manufacturing stage, you don't need to again dig out more materials to then derive whatever value you want to derive out of them, so that you regenerate and you regenerate that kind of economy. So in terms of resource efficiency action in India, both Shouvik and Dr. Banerjee have actually been involved with that entire journey for a very, very long time, much before me. In 2013, one of the first studies on understanding what are the resource consumption, resource use trends in India was done. It was called India's Future Needs for Resources, Dimension, Challenge, and Possible Solutions. It came out in 2013 out of an Indo-German Environment Partnership Program between the Ministry of Environment in Germany and the Ministry of Environment in India. This report sort of led to thinking about what is needed to be done at an institutional level to really think through how do we understand and how do we begin to create a framework for resource efficiency, policy framework for resource efficiency in India, and how do we create that ecosystem. So from that thinking, what happened next was that there was a full-fledged bilateral project that came into being, and it started in 2014 and ended in 2017. One of the key things that bilateral project actually did was support the formation of an Indian resource panel. In 2015, the Indian resource panel was the first of its kind panel domestically anywhere, and it had 10 experts from various stakeholder groups, including government, civil society, industry, think tanks, and these experts then prepared the recommendations for a framework for an Indian resource efficiency program. They also gave a 10-point sort of recommendations on what could be done. And these recommendations range from also understanding what kind of policies and what kind of guidelines and rules already exist in India, and then thinking through from a life cycle perspective of what is it that is needed to be done. For example, they said that we obviously need a multi-sectoral and multi-level strategy for mainstreaming this kind of thinking, and for that a silos approach is not going to be useful. And because resource use is not, let's say, issue of only steel ministry or issue of environment or issue of mining or urban development, resource use is really the basis of the modern economy. So we have to mainstream this kind of thinking across different sectors, across different departments. So that was one important area. And something they also said was, if we want to move towards that, we also need to understand how we will measure progress. And Shouvik will talk about that much later. But also what kind of cross-sectoral instruments and tools that are needed to support the development of that ecosystems. They range from sustainable public procurement, eco-labeling, standards, and many more things. And yeah, so basically the Indian Resource Panel came up with these kind of recommendations, and what then happened was that all these recommendations from the Indian Resource Panel document was then taken up and formulated in form of a resource efficiency strategy for India. And this work was actually being then taken up by a resource efficiency initiative, which is what I'm part of currently. And the resource efficiency initiative then worked with the NITI Aayog and and also with the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So with the NITI Aayog, what was done was that a resource efficiency strategy for India was launched. It had a core action program and a medium to long-term action program. The core action program included actions like institutional development, which basically led to formation of an interdepartmental committee with 9 ministries in it, including the Ministry of Environment as a very important actor. And what was also done then subsequently, that they also advised for us to go and conduct workshops and trainings and orientation trainings in 3 states that are mineral rich, where there's a lot of mining activity, and that are also open to taking up this kind of thinking. So we went and did workshop in 3 states: Goa, Telangana, and Odisha. And what then led to was these 3 states starting to develop their own resource efficiency strategies and identifying what are the sectors that they needed to look at, identifying key sectors, and identifying what are the kind of measures that are needed across the life cycle for these sectors to become more resource efficient and circular economic. And so the first state strategy for Goa was actually released last year in February, and Telangana is also aiming to release it sometime this year. I think by May or June they will release it. They got pushed back due to COVID a little bit, actually by a year now. And so all of this together then led to also in EU and India talking about what is it that they can do together, what kind of partnership that they can think about to drive this agenda forward. So EU internationally is also an important actor when it comes to setting the conversation on resource efficiency and circular economy in motion. And many of its economy have resource efficiency programs or circular economy programs. 2 of these are Germany and Netherlands, and Denmark, Sweden, and the Nordic countries also have their own set of actions, and Belgium and their municipalities are also doing a lot of action. So EU and India, given the work that was already happening under the resource efficiency initiative, also then agreed on a joint declaration on resource efficiency and circular economy, which will lead to which will also lead to a partnership between EU and India for taking forward this work in the next few years. And we are now in the second phase of the resource efficiency initiative, and the resource efficiency initiative will act as one of the key vehicles for taking forward that work. So I've already sort of talked about the developments of what has happened, but in terms of understanding the impacts of what a bilateral initiative at first, and then the EU REI initiative then had on the entire ecosystem was that after the implementation of the resource efficiency strategy and going into the states, there were 4 sectoral RE strategies that were also released. This was in January 2019, and these strategies were for Ministry of Mines. They looked at aluminium as a resource, and they wanted to understand how to make it more circular and resource efficient. Then Ministry of Steel came out with a strategy. Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs wanted to look at how to tackle the question of construction and demolition waste, because Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs is actually the key ministry that works with the ULBs and the urban local bodies or the municipal corporations, and these ULBs are the key responsible actors in our rules. And I think I should have touched upon the rules before, but so we have in 2016 we had a revision of many waste rules, and a few new waste rules also came into picture. So earlier there was municipal solid waste rules, now we have solid waste management rule, construction demolition waste rule, plastics waste management rules, and also e-waste and battery rules. The plastics and e-waste rules have the extended producer responsibility as an instrument. So going into that, so Housing and Urban Affairs basically is the responsible ministry to work with the ULBs to come up with a model that makes it that facilitates utilization of construction and demolition waste. So it's not a rule that is command and control rule. It is a promotional, it is a facilitative sort of rule also that looks at utilization of the resource. And then Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology also came out with a strategy for e-waste utilization. All of this together then was looked at by Ministry of Environment. They have a resource efficiency cell that is supported by our project and by Terry. And so they have come out with a draft resource efficiency policy. It is still in draft stages, and the strategy is also more facilitative, and it will seek to build up an ecosystem that sort of supports the transition towards a circular economy in India. I've already talked about these strategies. So I want to briefly touch upon also the role of different stakeholders. So SCP is sustainable consumption and production, and SCP is also, when we're thinking of production, then working with industry and businesses is very key, because they are responsible for production, and they're also responsible for putting certain products on the market that consumers consume. And EUREI and also other actors that work on resource efficiency and circular economy regularly engage and work with the private sector. And also in working with the private sector, we also work with a lot of innovators and MSMEs to understand what kind of alternatives to different kind of materials are existing. I think we can go to next. Yeah, this is, we can also skip this now.
Riva, the private sector discussion, we can have it after Soviet, since we already 20 minutes.
Okay.
So should we hold off for that one?
Yeah, I'll just touch upon the Circularity Gap report as an important.
Yes.
Yeah. So another thing, in terms of talking about resource use and resource consumption globally, there is a group called Circular Economy, and they come out with the Circularity Gap reports. They've been doing this since 3 years now. And in 2020, they came out with a global circularity report, which said that as compared to 2 years earlier, there has been a decline in global circularity. They also identified some underlying trends for it. And they said that high rates of extractions continue despite a lot of policies around resource efficiency, circular economy, waste utilization and recovery. High rates of extraction continue. There's an ongoing stock buildup, especially due to the construction industry and due to building and construction around the world. And the levels of end of use processing and recycling are still very low. They're a fraction of what is actually what can actually be achieved. And it is important in future to also design our products, our processes and systems in such a way that whatever stock we are building up now for future is amenable to maintenance, is amenable to repair and reusability, because these are the key things that will also contribute to circularity in future. So whatever we decide now in terms of design of our systems is something that will also have an impact years from now. So yeah, so I will like to close with that for now, and I look forward to any questions at the end of the session.
Okay, good. Thank you. So we turn to our next speaker, Shobik. I have stopped sharing my screen. So Shobik, you can start sharing your screen.
Yeah.
And while Shobik is sharing his screen, I'll ask the audience to, if you want to submit questions, you can submit in the question and answer box, and we will have them at the end.
So just a kind of a quick check. Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, first of all, and congratulations to Abhijit Banerjee for organizing this webinar at a time when we feel the relevance of resource efficiency and circular economy, I think the most. What could have been the best time when we are all like staying back and with the recent surge in the COVID, possibly we are kind of also supporting resource efficiency by staying indoors, possibly not using our cars or like commuting and reducing our carbon footprint and material footprint. Both Abhijit and Reva had given a very good context in terms of explaining what resource efficiency is, the recent developments that we have seen in India so far promoting circular economy and resource efficiency. And what I would like to do is a little bit of maybe a repetition, what we have been already listening for the last 1 hour. But I would more delve into the possible framework in terms of the implementation process. And when I say a kind of a framework, it is largely the kind of an institutional framework rather than the business framework, which I think we can discuss at greater length during our interactive session. So just a kind of a quick recap, I'm not going to discuss and explain what these numbers are. It had been presented very well by Abhijit as well as Reva. But if you look at the kink in 2000, as you can see from this diagram, which is in the middle, 2000 in fact was the year when the region, particularly the South Asia and the Southeast Asian region, were like facing a kind of a IT slump. And after that one, you can see the growth phase. And between 2002 and 2007, we have experienced phenomenal growth. In fact, in recent decades, I would say one of the best performing years in the Indian economy. So, and that is very much reflected in terms of our overall consumption during that time. In fact, during that time, the growth of consumption, in fact, doubled, in fact, 2%. And you know why?
Shobik,
Yeah.
someone is pointing out the PPT is not full screen.
Okay, so maybe I'll switch to, let me stop sharing, and then I might go to this. Is it now visible?
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Abhijit, for pointing it out. So you can see the phenomenal growth. And why is it so? It was during this time when we had seen almost 300 million people, in fact, moving to the middle income class, from the lower income class to the middle income class. In fact, 60 increase in the overall ownership of television sets, increasing from almost 37% to 66%. Almost 1 to 1.2 billion people, in fact, subscribing to at least one mobile phone handsets. 30 to 35% increase in the overall refrigeration ownerships, and so forth. So you can see these are all like real examples of how our material requirement has increased, and which is absolutely fair from the perspective of our aspirations. Everybody wants to own a kind of a own set. So for example, somebody who is now a student, and many of you are, when you actually move into that earning bracket, you will possibly think of owning a two-wheeler. And as you earn more, you will possibly graduate to a kind of a four-wheeler, which is a hatchback, and then you will go to a kind of a sedan, and then compact SUV, and then full SUV, and the demand continues. So where do we end? Is there an end? So we are talking about resource efficiency, and when we are discussing about bringing in more material productivity, I think there is also need for a discussion on the sufficiency. I think maybe we can discuss this one later. Now, we have already discussed in terms of India's material consumption at more than 7 billion tons, although India stands second. But I don't know how many of you are aware, China's consumption of material is 5 times the India's consumption of materials. So if India's consumption of material is around 7 billion tons, then China's consumption is almost 35 billion tons. So you can imagine like where the gap in the consumption between India as well as China. And if this trend continues, although this, I would say, a kind of a revision which is needed, and this is based on the exercise which Reva was mentioning in 2013, which the Indo-German Environment Program and TERI did together. And we see that the total consumption of material can reach up to 25 billion tons by 2050, even on a moderate scale. So even on a higher scale, it can go to up to 60 billion tons. So what does that mean? Like in between 1990 and 2010, we had consumed 37 billion tons of biomass. Between 2010 and 2030, we would be consuming 51 billion tons. But more importantly, look at the non-metallic minerals. And what are those non-metallic minerals? Everything which is going into constructions. And when we say that 70% of our construction is yet to come up, this is an absolute reflection of the fact that if we have the remaining construction coming up in the coming decades, then your material consumption would be almost 4 to 5 times of what we had witnessed in the past decades. Now, how then we actually reduce our overall dependence on resources? It's not a rocket science. It's very simple, and we all do it. Many of you use Ola and Uber, a shared platform, a very unique business model that they have adopted. So rather than like really taking your vehicle and going to work as well as for office or personal use, you are adopting a kind of a more shared kind of a practice, which is an implication or a reflection of your circular economy. So as you move from top to bottom, you are actually moving away from this linear system and bringing in these closed loops. And these closed loops at each and every stage of the production consumption system is helping you to achieve or move towards more circular systems. And the moment we are able to bring in those circularity in the system, we are able to reduce our primary dependence. And I would again like you to recall the table, the graph which Abhijit had mentioned, that the overburden or the materials which are left behind before we use our materials at the final stage, we would be able to not only reduce that huge gap, but we would be able to also reduce the kind of virgin net materials which are going into producing. But at the same time, I would like to touch upon the aspect of sufficiency. Efficiency is one aspect, but sufficiency is also equally important. That where should we end? Is there a way how we can actually cap the consumption of or the ownership of vehicles, or the number of clothes that you should be buying from the market, or maybe the kind of number of rooms that you should have in a house if you're constructing? Well, this is more ethical issues, although the discussions are on, but I think this more delve into the consumption behavior pattern. You have to understand the behavioral aspects. So it's more of a kind of a very microeconomic perspective that we need to look at. But nonetheless, it is important to equally emphasize the importance of the sufficiency. Now, for the past 1 hour, we have been discussing a lot on strategy. So what is a strategy? So any strategy is something that helps you to achieve towards a specific goal and an objective. And here, our goal or objective is to achieve resource efficiency. So what would be the key elements of a typical strategy? Now, the first and the foremost thing of us, any strategy would be that how we are going to implement it. Okay, obviously, what you are going to implement would come up from various sectors and technical, but given the fact that this particular audience is more having a kind of an understanding of the governance, so I think it is more important to discuss on the governance architecture rather than the technical architecture. Now, the governance architecture is all about the institutional setup, like in an Indian setting wherein you have different ministries looking at different products, different sectors, and more importantly, at different stages of the production consumption value chain. So how you ensure that all the ministries are able to come together and kind of deliver what is the need of the hour. So that institutional framework I'm going to discuss a little bit. um, I'm going to not talk about the sectoral material and resources prioritization because this has already been discussed. Largely, it is all about how you prioritize. You cannot take everything at one go because there are limitations to human resources, there are limitations to technologies, there are even limitations to even understanding of those, right? So there are many which might be in the R&D phase, which might be even copyrighted or patented or protected, which cannot be simply taken up, and there are cost implications. So those are the kind of considerations that one should have in terms of scaling it up. And when I say scaling it up, it actually is about broadening your sectors, materials, and resources. But you have to start somewhere with some sectors. The third element is your instruments, because instruments and the policy instruments are going to help you change the behavior. These are all about creating or nudging the behavior in the right directions to in fact stimulate people to behave in the manner which is the need of the hour, right? So those policy instruments are very critical, but more importantly, critical is that how it is implemented. And again, going back to the institutional framework is very important. And finally, how we monitor, because if we do not monitor, we won't be able to understand where we stand. Your marks, say for example, helps you to understand where how you performed maybe in the last semester or maybe the semester before vis-a-vis how you're performing now. So your improvement in your overall performance, whether it's in the academic life, whether it's in the business life, there has to be, or even in the policy making community, there has to be certain indicators for which we need information and data. And gradually as we move, we will be able to have more data, more information under certain brackets, which we call indicators, which are needed to be decided when the strategies are prepared. Now, it is very challenging. In fact, it was challenging to identify that what kind of a governance mechanism we should have. I would like to take what Reva had said, that um, the issues are not centralized, or it is not a mandate of a specific ministry. It is very cross ministerial. And I would say even cross regional, because there are certain issues where the empowerment is required at the ground level, at the bottom level, and where there is a requirement of empowerment at the top level. Although we are talking about the policy, but we have to have everybody on board to ensure that we are able to achieve our goal of sustainable consumption and production. So one of the things that was suggested as a part of the draft National Resource Efficiency Policy, which the Ministry of Environment and Forest came up with almost a couple of years ago, was the fact that you create a kind of an autonomous entity just like that of a Bureau of Energy Efficiency. I don't know how many of you are aware. It was formed as a part of the the Electricity Act of 2002, wherein an independent entity or an autonomous entity would be created that will play, in fact, they are playing a very important role in terms of promoting energy efficiency. You know, the 3 stars or the 5 stars. So whenever you go and buy a air conditioner, you will see that, okay, well, ये क्या 3 star का है या 5 star का है? 3 star costs less because it will consume more energy, and 5 stars costs more because it will cost you less in terms of the energy costs. So can we replicate that kind of an institutional mechanism? But the fact is that you do not have a kind of a proper act to in fact support it. Then what can be considered as a kind of a enabling provision under the existing government policies, which can help to actually give a kind of a mandate to the entity. So it was decided that your Article 4 of the Environmental Pollution Control Act, that talks about setting up of any entity which will help in addressing a larger environmental goal. And definitely sustainable consumption and production is one of the major environmental goals, because if you look at it from the perspective of waste generation, if you look at it from the perspective of emissions, so these are all ill effects of your overconsumption, right? So if we look at the structure, it is divided into 2 parts. So one is basically a kind of a core group, wherein you have a person who is who is heading, just like you have a Bureau of Energy Efficiency Director General, you have a director, you have a deputy director, you have experts across various sectors. They are supported by the technical as well as the non-technical people. But that doesn't mean that they are working in isolation. They have to be, in fact, aligned with all the ministries, all the relevant departments. We are talking about Mines Ministry, Steel Ministry, Petrochemicals Ministry, Department of Heavy Industries, Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises. And more importantly, when it comes to the state level, there are many departments or subjects which come under the state categories, the land, for example. So we need to have the land department in the individual states. So you can see an amalgamation of all the different entities as a kind of a member group or a kind of a steering committee, wherein each and every, there are representation from each and every committee coming together. And in fact, in each meeting, you have a prioritized issue. You identify what are the goals which are being approved by the group committee. It's not a kind of a goal which is taken in isolation and autocratically by the core working group, but in isolation. But what the core working group is going to do is more of a facilitating organization, bringing everybody together, documenting it, collecting data, analyzing it, presenting it, in fact, for their review and feedback, so that they can go back to their own ministries and see that what are the kind of challenges that they have faced in terms of its implementation, coming back and again giving their inputs. And this is primarily a kind of an entity which which the ministry had proposed as a National Resource Efficiency Authority. So what are their objectives? Their proposed objectives, and it's proposed because it is not yet developed, but it is proposed that it is going to mainstream and holistic and integrated approach thinking, develop action plans, establish the targets for the different sectors, setting up standards and guidelines, creating kind of data and information. Where are going to data going to come from? How much amount of water you have withdrawn, say from a specific location in, say, South India? Who is going to give that data? There has to be somebody who collects the data for a specific region or a basin, is providing that data to a central data repository, just like the aspect of the sustainable development goals. Although Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation is the entity for coming up with the national indicator framework, but it is the Niti Aayog who are actually collating various data. So they measure the progress. So similarly here, NREA can actually undertake the work of assessing the progress. There can be support collaborations, in fact, support in the form of channelizing financial resources from the private sector, from the international and national donor agencies, and also allocating resources, financial resources from the different funds of the government. providing training and capacity building. So just like in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, they have the energy auditors. Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, they have the Surya Mitras. And what the Surya Mitras do? They actually work with the consultants in terms of setting up of solar panels on the rooftop. So they will come, they are trained, they will help the consultant companies to in fact install them if required. Particularly in remote locations where the presence of bigger players are not so visible, and securing financing for mainstreaming resource efficiency. But at
Shobik,
this, yeah,
Shobik, 5 minutes.
yeah, I'll be done in less than that. But at the same time, there are also issues with regard to the current structure, because there might be certain concerns in terms of the individual ministries, in fact, raising questions that how our mandate is being taken by another ministry, which is a very genuine concern. So there is an alternative thinking in terms of how a kind of a different institutional mechanism can be proposed. And this is something which we were also discussing internally, and possibly a kind of a ministerial resource efficiency boards are established. So each and every ministry, they have their own set of boards that are representative of the academia, industry, civil society, the relevant departments, including the state departments. And these boards are aligned to the different ministries. So say Ministry of Mines will have its own set of board, or own board. Then Ministry of Steel will have its own board. Ministry of Information Technology will have its own board, or Ministry of Heavy Industry will have its board. And they come up with their own sectoral strategies. And we are seeing a kind of a reflection of this by wherein some of the ministries are already coming up with their draft action plan or strategies. So for example, Ministry of Environment came up with their recent draft notification of banning single-use plastics, which are less than 120 microns. Now, a question to you all, whether it is good or bad. Think of it and do let me know. Maybe in the question hour session, we can discuss it, whether it is going to be good or whether it's going to be bad. Apparently it looks good, but there might be also challenges. Think of it. And then you have the kind of inter-ministerial coordination committee. It can be either led by the Niti Aayog or a kind of an empowered committee formed by the directorate of or the cabinet secretariat, where you have 5 or 6 key ministers from the cabinet and who can actually monitor and see the implementation process. And they look at the coordination part with the ministries, strengthening the 6R along the product life cycles, monitoring and exploring the synergies, revising the targets as and when we move on, and taking feedback, again, the way we had discussed earlier. Now, this makes more sensible because the independence are given to the ministries and they are able to come up with their own strategies. And there is a better coordination because you have a more interactive learning process. You have a more coordinated kind of a system as empowered to the committee. Now, what will
Shobik,
yeah.
Shobik, these we can discuss. We have 2 minutes. These we
Yeah.
can discuss during a discussion. You just focus on the indicators and then we'll end.
Yeah, so we will discuss on the indicators and then we will end. Now, there are different kind of input, as I mentioned, that you need to have a kind of a progress assessment. How do we look at the progress? You have the inputs, you have the consumption, you have the output and the efficiency indicators. Now, one of the most important indicators which are used is the material productivity. So how much ye kitna deta hai, by 1 liter mein kitna chalega? So it is just like that. How much amount of material would be required in order to generate 1 rupee in the economy, right? So more if we are able to produce from or if we are able to produce 1 unit in the economy by in fact producing or consuming less materials, so your productivity improves. And that is one of the overarching indicator being produced. But definitely, because of the paucity of time, I'm not going into the other indicators, but definitely this presentation would be made available and I'll be available for any questions and feedback you may have for that matter. So let me end it here and over to you, Abhijit. Abhijit, you are muted.
Yes, thank you, Shobik. Thank you, both speakers. We have learned about how the whole thing started with international cooperation from German-funded resource efficiency project, then the EU-funded project, and how a Ministry of Environment took it up, then finally Niti Aayog, brought in the inter-ministerial coordination, the international resource panel of experts, sorry, the Indian resource panel of experts, and their recommendations, and the Niti Aayog developed the strategy on resource efficiency, and the 4 priority sectors: electronic waste, steel, aluminum, and construction demolition. And then finally, from Shobik, we learned about the institutional structure, that this enormous coordination, economy-wide coordination, would need a governance structure. So this is not easy. So as you heard from the speaker, you cannot just, you have to deliberate with so many stakeholders. You cannot just develop it overnight. So this is a long process of deliberation with the different ministries at the state level, with the private sector, civil society, and so on. So and also the indicators, we don't have, like, unlike in Europe, we don't have that granular level of data. So because to mark progress, we need granular level of data, but which we don't have. So at the central level, we need to first develop those data indicators before we can even track progress. So we need to generate that data, and Shobik is part of the team which is working on that process. So a few years from now, we will perhaps have the beginnings of indicators where we'll be able to track what progress we have been able to make over the last 5 years or so. Okay, so to the listeners, please type your questions in the question answer box. Let me start with asking our speakers about a little bit of maybe from the private sector perspective. We have been talking mostly about what the government strategy has been, and the institutional structure and adoption of targets and indicators. But in your interactions with the private sector, that's the first question to Reva, perhaps, that who are the key private sector players who are already on board, or who are taking it really seriously, who are taking it forward? Who are, just name some key private sector initiatives.
In terms of private sector, I mean, I can talk about the associations. I mean, FICCI and CII are 2 biggest industry associations, and both of these associations are, I mean, talking to their members about resource efficiency and circular economy, and thinking about what kind of, measures, incentives are needed to sort of push private sector on that path. So, for example, FICCI has a circular economy committee. They hold a circular economy symposium. They've been doing it for the last 2 to 3 years, and the symposium has sort of become an important place for different circular economy actors, from big corporates to component manufacturers to startups and innovators, and to really understand what is it that each of these, I mean, business is also not one homogeneous stakeholder. That is also extremely heterogeneous, very, very diverse, located across different geographies, and located in different places in the value chain. So they have been trying to also talk to their members and private sector and understand what their needs are. And they've been also coming out with reports around the issue. They've been FICCI has come out with a plastics report last year. They've also come out with a more overarching report on circular economy. On CII's front, we know that they're also talking to their members. They've also come out with a sort of a primer for their CEOs on what circular economy is, what is it that the CEOs can also take charge of and lead their companies in that direction. And as recent as actually last month, they have come up with an alliance which is called BRACE. The short form is BRACE. It's called Beyond Recycling Alliance on Circular Economy. So they also want their members to think that of circular economy, not just as a recycling issues, but what is it that companies can do more upstream in terms of utilizing recycled content in their products. An important example of an initiative that I can give you that is very concrete is of the Ultratech, Aditya Birla Ultratech and Aditya Birla Hindalco coming together. So Hindalco is an aluminium copper refinery a corporation of Aditya Birla, and Ultratech is more into cement. And I mean, cement industry has been utilizing a lot of secondary raw materials. So they've utilized fly ash in the past. So red mud utilization, which is a bauxite residue from the aluminum industry, has been a challenge. And I mean, storing that residue has been a challenge. And then in terms of identifying what is it that we can extract and how do we transport it, so transportation cost was a big barrier that when at the beginning the companies started to talk about how to utilize red mud. But last year they had an MOU between these two companies, and so now Ultratech will utilize the red mud generated out of Hindalco operations. And Hindalco is trying to make sure that the 100% of its red mud residue is utilized. So that's a very big step. In terms of talking about, let's say, plastics, there are all kinds of startups and innovators that look at alternatives to plastics, or also recycling plastics from bumper to bumper, or using HDP to HDP. So there are those kind of innovation also there. And yeah, so I mean, there are more and more such activities being taken up. But I also saw in the Q&A section that somebody asked if there is so much work going on in the committee, then why are we not seeing similar result in terms of its implementation with the private sector, with coming up with a business model? And I thought it's a very good question. I mean, my answer to that would be that we are still a very linear economy. We are beginning to really think through what is it that we need to do, and the committees have to take like an overall all view of the entire thing. And yeah, and for example, in our work now, EU REI will look towards implementing on-ground pilots with private sector, with innovators, to see what is it that we can do, what are the barriers, what are the opportunities, what works, what doesn't work. So I mean, we really with that journey has started, but we still have a long way to go.
Okay, thank you. So next question for Shobik. One of the policy instruments worldwide to promote more resource efficiency and circular economy is extended producer responsibility, EPR. In India, we have started to use EPR in plastic waste, electronic waste. Particularly if you look at electronic waste, what are some of the challenges that the private sector is facing? EPR, as the students know, EPR is making the manufacturers responsible for collecting and channelizing the used products so that they are properly recycled and not just wasted or dumped. And adoption of EPR is a step in the right direction, definitely. But what are companies, what is the private sector facing as in terms of challenges in implementing EPR?
Well, this is very relevant, and I think one of the most discussed question when it comes to implementation of EPR is that what are the limitations or the challenges that the business sector is facing when it comes to its implementation. So if you look at the kind of products that we use, electronic products, say for example, it can be very diverse, from mobile phones to televisions to CD players to washing machines to your microwaves and so forth. Now, first of all, the getting the right volume is one of the major problems. So quite often it is all about creating the awareness among the people that don't discard it, bring it back whenever you are actually buying a new product. But bringing that infrastructure at the right place where, say, somebody is actually going to buy a kind of a mobile is not there. So just consumers possibly do not have that facility, and providing that facility of like giving it back to the producer is a big challenge. So we do have the PROs who play an important role. So definitely that is one of the kind of impediment. The second impediment I would say is the kind of technologies and uptake of that recycled materials. Because if there are a competition between a material coming from a recycled material, say for example an e-waste, vis-a-vis a material which is coming from a virgin source, possibly the material which is going to come from a virgin source would be much more in terms of its purity and quality and price vis-a-vis the recycled route. So it is also about like giving what kind of technologies exist that in terms of the quality and the cost we are able to reduce it. So that is the second aspect. And the third aspect is possibly I think one of the more important things is that given it's so diverse, all the PROs are not in a possible in a position to actually cater to the huge amount of waste being generated in India. So can we go for more PROs, or should we go for more PROs, or we should go for more awareness? Is the kind of like question that is being discussed extensively among the business communities.
Yes.
So I think which they are doing it, and hopefully in the near future the collection rates are going up, and hopefully we will be able to achieve the targets that have been laid out.
Yes, thank you. Yes, those of you who are aware of the waste management rules, the India government has targets actually for companies are not meeting those targets. And as Souvik mentioned, some of the reasons. If I want to add something, that most of our collection of waste is dominated by the informal sector, and the informal sector have their own ecosystem, and ideally the informal sector would engage in collection, and the formal sector would engage in actual recycling. But that linkage is not necessarily happening properly. So that if this happens smoothly, then the entire collection would go over to the formal sector for recycling. But this has been one of the challenges that even though we have a EPR mandate, it's not yet working. It's a process. We are just starting to see some progress. The other point that Souvik mentioned was that if we don't buy recycled stuff, products made of secondary materials, then we can't complete the loop. So it's sometimes there is maybe inferiority with the product recycled products, but oftentimes it's not actual inferiority, it's perceived inferiority. So the market demand for products made from secondary materials always suffer from the market, suffer in the market. So let me go back to Souvik. What are some policies the government of India is trying to adopt to promote adoption of recycled products made from secondary materials, maybe through eco-labeling, or, for what are the strategies?
So one of the important recommendations that have been like going to the ministries, to the sectors, is that you create some kind of standards, and that standards are kind of accepted by the Bureau of Energy, Bureau of Indian Standards, the standard setting organization. So you have a quality standard, and then you create a market for those standards. But unfortunately it takes a lot of time, and because of this high lead time between a product being made and the standards being provided, I think there is a lot lost opportunity in between. So there is a need for increasing or reducing the lead time between the product being sent to the BIS for standard certification, and they after testing they are given it. The second is obviously the kind of incentives mechanism for maybe some recycled materials. There are certain private sector initiatives. Say, for example, if you look at the Amazon packaging plastics, I don't know how many of you have seen, the black and the gray package which Amazon actually provides. So at the back of that package, you will find that if you give it back to that company, they will give you a kind of a 5 rupee, and they will buy that plastic at the rate of rupees 5 per kilogram. But unfortunately, they do not have. When I call them up, in fact, I call them up to check that if they have somebody to actually come and collect it. Unfortunately, they do not have it. So I think that reverse logistics and collection mechanism is also important. Thirdly, what is important is from the perspective of providing certain viability gap funding. And I think during the COVID time, this was one of the mechanisms that, in fact, one of the policies that were identified as a part of the economic recovery schedule was that you provide a huge amount of capital subsidy to the tune of 25% on in the electronic sector. So any capacity which is achieving certain amount of production targets, they will be eligible for it. And that is where I think the businesses need to tap it to the extent possible, that they are able to create infrastructure wherein they would possibly be able to make use of the secondary materials which are coming into the system. Obviously, there are various plans and programs, but I think there is still a lot in terms of what can be done and what is currently being done. And that is what is this strategy all about. And you may recollect the discussion that I was having, that you do have the taxes, you do penalize what is actually not correct, and you do actually incentivize what is correct. Do you provide any kind of an incentive structure for a material which is recycled to create and compete with it? Can you identify certain environmental liability for the products which are being not recycled? Yes, they are being done. Say, for example, National Green Tribunal will frequently come up with some kind of a fees on, say, the Pepsis and the Cokes for not complying with the EPRs. Very recently, you may have seen that 5 crore was imposed to Pepsi, and I think 50 lakhs to this thing. So I think those are important, but that comes sporadically and not very categorically. And I think that needs to be kind of mainstreams. And finally, what the government is trying to do is through these awareness programs, through various channels and networks.
Shobik, since you brought up the question of tax, somebody submitted a question on GST. So it seems that GST rates are such that it may not always favor recycled products. So has there been some thinking in trying to rationalize GST rates?
Yes, in fact, there was a discussion, I think, almost a couple of years ago, that the GST of recycled building materials was fetching a higher rate than the virgin materials. So this is definitely true. Say, for example, coal fetches a GST of 5% when there was a discussion that it is whether it is a merit good or a demerit good. So if it is a demerit good, then why coal is being fetched kind of a 5% GST? So I think that rationalization is very critical, because, and I think awareness is very important, because people who are actually at the GST Council, they need to understand all those elements to see that what product I need to promote and what product I don't want to promote. And accordingly, because now everything is being circumvented under the GST, so I think GST would eventually play a very important role to give the right kind of pricing signals and the expectations that the government has from the consumers from its behavioral perspective.
Okay, thank you. Another question on decentralization, maybe Reva can answer this. We have one question from a student that we heard a lot about the ministry level infrastructure, but a lot of, particularly when we talk of waste management and waste recycling, most of the action happens at the city level. So how can we empower, and cities, as we know, are under-resourced, very, very under-resourced in terms of financial and as well as personnel. So how can we empower cities so that they are able to better channelize secondary resources? Is there any effort in that direction?
Thank you. Yes, indeed. I mean, all the most of the waste management rules have the cities, the urban local bodies, and as the key responsible actor for managing of waste. And and the volume, given the volume of waste and the range, I mean the different streams of waste, it is extremely difficult for the ULBs to also manage them. And so I mean within the rules as well, and also through the instrument of extended producer responsibility. I mean, the extended producer responsibility instrument is in place because there is a recognition that I mean, you one, that the producers are responsible for the kind of material and the goods they put in the market, and it's not that they can just put any kind of material in the market and the ULBs will be responsible to deal with it at the end of it. Secondly, there have been different kind of models that have come up I mean, for the ULBs to also take up in terms of managing certain waste. And I mean, currently there are 3 waste rules that identify ULBs as a key actor: the plastics, the construction and demolition waste, and the solid waste rules. Sadly, in the e-waste rules, ULBs are not mentioned as key actors, and neither is the informal sector recognized as a key actor for collection purposes, at least. But in terms of, I mean, I'll talk about the C&D waste rules, and Abhijit, maybe you can also add what, I mean, in the discussions that we have had with the ULBs, also in the meetings, in the meetings where all the ULBs come together and also talk about what is it that they can do. There has been a need that has been identified for like a management model. So one thing that I mean, development cooperation agencies or think tanks like TERI and I mean also academia is also trying to do is to sort of build capacities of the ULBs and talk to them about, okay, these are the rules, this is what your responsibility is, but how do you create a management plan to sort of manage this waste? And in creating that management plan, there are a lot of technical elements that are required to be understood. So hand holding them through that is also important, and then sort of disseminating this information to other ULBs, training them on okay, what could a management plan look like, what are the technical elements of developing that management plan, what are the kind of tenders you will need to develop to invite the right kind of agencies to set up a recovery reutilization plant. And I mean also, I mean understanding what is it, the quantum of waste that they will need to utilize. I mean, you could have a certain quantum of waste and you could set up a very big recycling plant, and then that doesn't I mean, there are I mean, basically it doesn't break even for the recycling plant. So to also, I mean, there is, all of these are extremely technical questions, and hand holding of ULBs is very important. And it's also similarly done in solid waste management rules, where
yes, if I may add, Riva, if I may add that Riva has summarized the efforts being made by these technical assistance organizations, like whether it's GIZ, whether it's TERI, EU, to actually work with capacity development of these cities who may be challenged in terms of capacity. The other point that Riva, that I want to add to Riva's point was that the cities do not necessarily have to invest crores of rupees in a recovery or recycling plant. That capital can come from the private sector. So it's through a private public partnership model. The cities only have to, they have to allot land, and the private sector can set up their recycling plant. But as Riva pointed out, if it is done in a well-managed way, it has to be profitable. The plant has to run profitably. So the business model and the management model has to be developed very carefully. So the cities do not necessarily need crores of rupees to set up, recycling plants. The private sector is open to making that investment. Many cities already have a recycling plants set up by the private sector. The cities only have to develop capacity to run these PPP models, private-public partnership models. And this is where agencies like GIZ and TERI, they come in. All these expert technical assistant agencies, they train the city officials, urban officials, in how do you manage these projects, develop these projects, the tendering, the studies that go with that are required to have a successful implementation of this model, and so on. I think we have time for only one quick question. Again to Reva, MSMEs can play an important role in promoting circular economy. Are there any specific approaches towards helping to promote MSMEs or to boost their success?
Shouvik has already talked about viability gap funding, but sometimes they are not available to MSMEs also. However, I don't know of like a systematic plan to boost or support MSMEs, especially in this sector. But what we are definitely trying to do is to sort of build an innovation network, and also develop pilots with the MSMEs, identify areas of their expertise, and also identify areas where they need sort of our support in development of a material value chain, from the perspective of also speaking to a whole range of stakeholders for development of that material value chain. So that is the kind of support that we are sort of envisaging in under our project. But maybe
yes, also,
we
can add something. Before that, I want to add that something that you have already undertaken. Lot of times MSMEs are informal or semi-formal, and GIZ was actually part of a project where this particular MSME in the electronic waste sector, who was working in the shadows, they, with the help of technical assistance from GIZ, they become formalized industry, which dramatically improved their success in both collection and recycling and so on, because they were recognized as a formal recycler. Shouvik, you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think thanks, Reva, Abhijit, for highlighting it out. In fact, in the automotive cluster, as you remember, what we were doing was essentially like converting and helping the industries to convert the scrap into byproducts. The scrap is something which you just sell it off without getting or hardly getting any money. But for byproducts, it makes more sense because it has a kind of a added value in terms of the revenue stream. And we could actually find that ecosystem within that region wherein there was a consumer for that particular scrap, and who was willing to pay a higher premium for that particular material which is coming out of the scrap. So this is a kind of a ecosystem which can be introduced within a kind of a smaller cluster, cost reduction, reducing environmental footprint, and adding value, thereby reducing your wastes. Just one point, like there are a lot of schemes under the Ministry of Small, Micro, Medium Enterprises, which promote technology upgradation across various sectors. So for example, wastewater treatment. Under the wastewater treatment, the central government provides a 50% capital subsidy. The state government provides a 25% capital subsidy, and it is the remaining 25% subsidy which is going, the remaining 25% of the cost that needs to be put in by the investor or the promoter. So I think these are existing schemes which can be customized, dovetail into the kind of larger discussion we are having on resource efficiency. And I think rather than reinventing the wheel, see what is existing, but make it more aware and see how it can help them achieve a better profitability, because that is what they look at the end of the day.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shouvik. That was the last question we have time for. So we have, from the two speakers we had, we kind of got a good idea of what is going on right now with government efforts, as well as with some a little bit of the private sector efforts that have been going on. So I think you got the impression that we are very early in the process compared to, think of the EU, for example, where countries like Germany have been undertaking economy-wide resource efficiency strategies for decades. So India is, with the help of international technical cooperation from Germany and EU, we have just started this process. We have started to adopt a nationwide strategy We have started to create an institutional framework. We are trying to get all stakeholders on board at the central and state levels, private sector. We have started to develop indicators. So as you can clearly see that we are very early in the process. So yes, we can be quite frustrated that, if you look around you, you will not be very, you won't feel very optimistic, but we have to understand that we are in a very early stage of the process. Maybe 10 years from now, we will be in a much better position where we can actually see improvements in the indicators that we have selected. So this is something we got a good impression from our speakers who are intimately involved with the processes, the efforts that are actually going on today. The last thing that we missed out kind of with our third speaker who had to call in sick is the more upstream business models. So there's a lot of innovation. We heard a little bit about it today, but there's a lot of innovation going on at the upstream stage with the private sector, maybe at the design stage, new business models, new designs, not just recycling of waste at much more upstream level. So there is some innovation going on there. And unfortunately, our third speaker was not able to make it today. So she has offered to share her presentation later with us. So after we all hope she recovers quickly, and after she recovers, she'll share her presentation with us. So we will share that with all of you. So on that note, let's thank all of you, particularly the speakers who took time from their weekends to join us and help our students. And we also want to thank all our audience who have stayed. We went about 15-20 minutes over time, who have been patiently listening, and they have submitted several questions which we have discussed in our webinar today. And finally, we need to thank our IT team who have supported us not only today, but also in creating the Zoom webinar registration link and everything, and also our design team, which designed our event flyer. So with that, I would like to end the event here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and stay safe.
Thank you.